Hi everyone, welcome to Vision IS and welcome to class number 5 of internal security in the regular batch. And in the last class I was discussing with you about the role of media and social media in creating challenges to India's internal security. We'll continue with our discussion today with the role of media in creating challenges to India's internal security. That's the topic that I will be covering the first up. And then we will move on to the topic of various security agencies and their mandate. And once we are done with that particular topic, whatever little time that is allowed to us today, we will start with the topic of border management as well. I've already shared a few handouts with the classroom team, and within a few minutes or by the end of this class at the maximum, those handouts would be uploaded on the student platform. They include some of the handouts related to the topics that we will be covering today, plus as well as some of the handwritten notes from the previous batches have been shared with you. So that's what will be part of our discussion today. But before I begin the discussion on role of media in creating challenges to India's internal security, if you have any questions or any doubts in your mind from the previous classes, please feel free to post them right now, and we can take them up for discussion in the class right away. Right. So any questions or any doubts that may be there pertaining to whatever we have discussed in the class till now, please feel free to ask those particular questions right now. Yes, any questions or any doubts from the previous classes, whatever topics we have discussed in the previous classes? Okay, none. So just give me a second. Okay, so we'll be talking about role of media in creating challenges to India's internal security. That's the topic we will be taking up today. Now, see, as far as the role of media in creating challenges to India's internal security is concerned, there are a plethora of challenges which media poses to India's internal security. Let's begin by talking about the fact that sensationalization of national security issues, which is done often by the media, which comes at the cost of hasty decision making by the policy makers in India, right? So it is often seen that sensationalization that is done by the news agencies, by the media agencies in India, tends to result in hasty decision making by the policymakers in India. I'll give you one simple example of how the national media, how the news channels at times may tend to sensationalize some of the issues and some of the problems. So when we discuss about the hijacking of IC-814, now some of you must be knowing about this. IC-814 was a plane of the Indian Airlines that was hijacked in 1999 by the hijackers, and this was a plane that was bound from Kathmandu to Mumbai, and it was taken to Kandahar in Afghanistan. And there the terrorists started to negotiate with India for the release of the hostages. In fact, they even killed one of the hostages who was on the plane, and the kind of pressure that was built by the terrorists was that they wanted a release of certain terrorists, especially the founder of Jaish-e-Mohammed, that is Maulana Masood Azhar, and a few others from Tihar jail in Delhi, in return for the safe passage to be provided for the hostages. Now the interesting thing is that see, in 1999 is also the year which was, and 1999, 2000 by the start of the new millennium was also the period when the Indian news channels had started to go completely standalone and 24/7. And before this, a number of news channels used to be at the max a bulletin or a two. We used to have the DD News, which used to be there, which used to be shown at 8 o'clock in the evening, then it used to be 9 o'clock in the morning, then 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and so on and so forth. We used to have a few bulletins kind of mechanism also. Say for example, Aaj Tak started as a 15-20 minute show, then gradually transformed into half an hour show, then gradually transformed into 1 hour show on the Doordarshan, and then eventually transformed into a news channel, the Aaj Tak. So the interesting thing is that when the news channels in India were not really well accustomed to showing a lot of content for more than 2 hours or 3 hours, they were now suddenly in the midst of a situation where they had to show content for 24 hours. So what would they do? They would end up focusing too much on one story or the other, and at times even sensationalizing some of the issues. Now, IC-814 hijacking was one such specific instance that happened at this point of time. I remember that I was growing up as a kid yet, and this entire issue of hijacking of the plane really intrigued and interested me. So I was also glued to the television channel all the time, trying to understand what are the developments and the details of the things that are happening on the hijacking front. Now, what these news channels would do is that they would show, there was a camera that had been still placed in front of that IC-814 that had been hijacked, and then they started taking in calls from across the country. Viewers would call in, and as you know that in India people have opinions on everything and anything, right? Even things which they may not really know much about, they may not have expertise, people definitely tend to have some kind of an opinion or some kind of a view. So people started calling in with their expert opinions, and then they would start telling the news channels that, why are we not using the NSG commandos? Why are we not entering the plane from the back? Why are we not entering the plane from the right, from the left? Why are we not releasing the hostages? This and that. And the news channels in India also use this as an opportunity to gain more TRP. In the return for that TRP, what they had to do is that they had to sensationalize the issue. So they ended up sensationalizing this hijacking of IC-814 to such an extent that they built a lot of pressure on the law and order and the security agencies and the decision makers in India. So much so that many of them were forced to think not from the perspective of a policy maker, but from the perspective of how the entire matter was being treated by the Indian news channels. And what they would do is that they would count instances of hijacking in the past. They counted one instance of hijacking in the past where Mehbooba Mufti was on a plane, and the hijackers had sought the return of Mehbooba Mufti and other hostages in return for some of the JKLF terrorists to be released, and so on and so forth. So they started showing that what if in case there was a minister's son or a daughter would have been there on the plane, then we would have definitely let go of the terrorists. We could anyway catch the terrorists again. But once precious lives are gone, then we will not be able to do anything, and so on and so forth. What this ultimately ended up doing was that it ended up creating a political pressure on the government of the day, because you have mobilized the entire public opinion with the help of news channels in the favor of the release of the hostages, even if it comes at the cost of the release of the terrorists in exchange for the terrorists. That ended up creating a lot of pressure on the government of the day, and it has been admitted in several accounts that have been published after the IC-814 hijacking that probably Indian government could have handled this entire situation in a much more mature manner, could have handled this in a much more comprehensive manner had we not been pressurized by the news channels in the country. So sensationalization of these national security issues by the news channels in India can cost very heavy to the national security of the country at times, especially when the leaders in the country, where the policy makers in the country may get under a lot of duress and pressure because of the popular media channels and the popular media outlets. And this is something that we keep seeing consistently from time to time. You can see how we responded after the Pulwama attacks. When the Pulwama blast took place, after that, the way the Indian news channels sensationalized the entire terrorist attack was natural to create some kind of an outrage in minds of the citizens, and it was also natural that the government would have been forced to take some action in haste. Now, I am not saying that government agencies have taken action in haste, but it can create unnecessary and undue pressure on the government agencies to take some action in haste and to do something, right? So, sensationalization of national security issues is one of the biggest challenges that we face as far as media poses to India's internal security. It can lead to hasty decision making at times. Now, see, why am I telling this? The reason why I say that is because if you look at when in 2010 the Chintanal massacre happened, we lost 76 soldiers. But such an outrage and such a controversy had not been created at that point of time. Such emotions were not flowing in the country at that point of time as they were flowing in case of Pulwama. I am not trying to compare the two terror attacks here and trying to say that one was more nasty than the other. But what all I am trying to say is that at times we tend to focus too much on some issues that tends to trivialize the national security issues and lead to the knee-jerk reactions by the policymakers. And that is what we need to be really, steering clear of in India. Sensationalization of national security issues. You must have seen, several news channels in India. I don't want to name a few. There is this one particular anchor comes at 9 o'clock in the evening every day. The only agenda that this person has is to in some way give inflammatory statements or to in some way arouse the sentiments and the feelings of the people that may make them more enraged and outraged, right? About what, against whom, it does not matter. All that is needed is that people should outrage on a daily basis, right? Now, what a lot of these news channels would do is that they tend to sensationalize national security issues in such a manner that it leads to unnecessary public pressure being created on the policy agencies, one. Secondly, what it also does is that some of the national security issues get trivialized to a yes or a no. For example, after Pulwama attacks, I remember that this one particular journalist, if someone may call him a journalist or a news anchor, so to say, on the news channel, what this person did was that he started asking people to call in and tell that whether India should go to war with Pakistan. Now, national security issues like whether India should go to war with Pakistan should not be decided in a TV newsroom or should not be decided over some dial-in callers on a TV news channel. They should be decided with a cool-headed mind, depending upon the pros and the cons of the situation, our preparation and so many other things by our military leaders, by our political leaders, by the political leadership of this country. These are not the decisions that are supposed to be taken. These are not the decisions on which you should be eliciting the opinion of the public in the broad daylight when you're trying to create some kind of a controversy over issues. So that is first, sensationalization of national security issues. Then, coverage of anti-terror operations. Irresponsible coverage by the news media agencies of the anti-terror operations is a major threat to India's internal security. Look at what happened during the 26/11 attacks. Right? Now, this is not an allegation. In fact, Supreme Court of India in its judgment in Ajmal Kasab versus State of Maharashtra has very specifically mentioned about the mischief that was caused by the news channels in India in order to gain more TRP. In order to gain more TRP, news channels started to show the news on the media outlet by trying to highlight that, see, so and so activity is taking place. We are showing you live footage from the anti-terror operations. Now, see, the problem with coverage of anti-terror operations in an irresponsible manner is that it can end up jeopardizing the entire anti-terror operation. And that happened also during 26/11 attacks. On Nariman House, the NSG decided that they would be para-dropping a few commandos on the roof of the Nariman House, and from there the NSG commandos would make their way to the hostages and would try to get the hostages released and would try to combat against the terrorists. Now, look at the stupidity of the news channels in India, that in order to show the 24/7 fastest coverage and sabse tez coverage on the news channels, they even ended up showing this particular anti-terror or counter-terror operation that was being taken up by NSG, to that extent that handlers of these terrorists in Pakistan were having satellite phones with them already, and they were able to communicate with the satellite phones with their handlers in the Dubai or wherever they were sitting in Pakistan. So these handlers were getting all the access to the information from Indian news channels because they did not need any other person to divulge them information about this counter-terror operation being taken by NSG, and they were transmitting it straight away to the terrorists. So terrorists became cautioned that now this is what is the movement of the various security forces of the NSG and this is how they are making a move. So this ended up seriously putting at risk not only the lives of the soldiers of the NSG but also the hostages, those who had been captured by the terrorists. So again, the coverage of anti-terror operations in a very irresponsible manner, without understanding what can be the pros and the cons associated with such coverage, in the hope for getting more TRPs, is another challenge that we need to discuss when we talk about the role of media in creating challenges to India's internal security. Then other than that, irresponsible coverage of communal conflicts in the country. See, communal conflicts will always continue to happen in a multicultural, multilingual, multi-diverse society such as India, because there will be always diversity of opinions and there will always be people and individuals who try to make the best use of that opportunity, especially politicians and political parties. So communal riots, communal conflicts will happen from time to time. But it is the responsibility of the news media channels to cover the communal conflicts in such a way that they should not highlight or show that which community has been attacked by which community and so on and so forth. They should not be releasing any such information. They should not be telling that Hindus have gone and attacked the Muslims. They should not be telling that the Muslims have gone and attacked the Hindus. They should not be telling that the Christians have gone and attacked the Hindus, and whatever the case be. Because there are certain basic ethics of journalism. And second is that there is a possibility of the entire situation getting inflamed even further if the information is not passed on in a discreet and in a responsible manner to the audiences. It has further inflammatory tendencies as well. So irresponsible coverage of communal conflicts, then reporting on sub judice matters. Now this is something that we know. The media trials, right? How the media conducts media trials and reports on sub judice matters and almost declares anyone innocent or guilty depending upon their own political disposition or depending upon their own convenience, right? Look at what happened in the Ryan International murder case. Now, the news channels for 2 days kept running the story that the conductor of the bus has committed the murder of the child, right? And the story kept going around the entire country, and they started even discussions on that how these children in the school buses are unsafe and the conductors are, people, those who are causing these kind of crimes, and sexual abuse is taking place and violence is taking place, etc. Only to be later found out that it was actually another student in the school who was actually responsible for the murder of that child. Similarly, look at how the Arushi murder case was handled. The problem with media trials and the problem with this over hyper aggressive investigative journalism is that it can lead to creating some kind of a cloudy judgment in the minds of the decision makers, especially the jury trial, or the judges also may get influenced because of some news that may be going around or that may be acceptable in the public opinion. So that is another issue that we can talk about. Then of course the issue of the paid news is another aspect that can be highlighted. A lot of times paid news is used as a mechanism to whitewash the image of the criminals and to even get them into politics. You must have often seen that how just before the elections, abhi aap dekhoge UP ke andar, Punjab ke andar, news channels will reach to chief ministers, news channels will reach to politicians, and then they would say, today we will spend our entire day with this particular politician, और फिर वो जाएंगे लालू जी के साथ. मतलब I'm just giving one example. They will go with लालू जी and they will say कि देखिए लालू जी कितने अच्छे पिता हैं, बच्चों का ख्याल रखते हैं, कितने अच्छे पति हैं, बीवी के साथ बैठ के चाय पी रहे हैं. फिर दिखाएंगे लालू जी अपनी भैंसवा से दूध निकाल रहे हैं, तो लालू जी जो बड़े एंटरप्राइजिंग भी हैं, बड़े मेहनती करते हैं. So what the media at times does is that it actually does the advertisement for the politicians in the name of the news and in the name of the news coverage. Essentially, it is not any kind of news coverage which is being done. What is being done is it is a political advertisement, but it is in the garb of news. So this phenomenon of paid news also poses threats to India's internal security, especially because what it can do is it can promote criminalization of politics. People, those who are having criminal background, people who should ideally not be getting entry into the legislature, are painted in such a manner with a white brush by the media that they tend to appear as heroes in front of the rest of the country. So that is also another issue that is associated with the internal security when we talk about the role of media agencies. And then of course, irresponsible coverage of the victims of terror attacks. A lot of times you would find a lot of insensitivity on the part of news channels and media agencies in India to cover the terror attacks. In fact, we have seen that the news media agencies in India may go to the extent of going to the victims of the terror attack and asking them, how are you feeling? What happened there? Try to unnecessarily create and recreate the trauma and the painful experience that a person may have gone through as a result of the security breach or as a result of the terror attack. So these are some of the issues that can be highlighted. See, of course, there are many others also. People can talk about how the media houses today are being controlled by the big businesses in India. Questions are not allowed to be asked of the government. Questions are not allowed to be asked of those people, those who are powerful. And questions are not allowed to be asked on issues that actually are pertaining to the national security. So if you see, the Indian media would hardly ever discuss any issue which actually concerns the common man. They would never discuss inflation. They would never discuss unemployment. They will never discuss issues related to women's security. They will never discuss issues associated with poverty. They will never discuss issues associated with the health infrastructure, physical infrastructure, roads, amenities, etc. that are provided to the citizen. What they will be discussing is that so-and-so politician has said so-and-so something about so-and-so wives, or so-and-so cricketer, or so-and-so cricketer has said something and so-and-so about so-and-so actor. So the issues that are covered by the media are also very trivial, and this trivialization of national security issues, sensationalization of national security issues, irresponsible coverage of the anti-terror attacks, all of these factors that we have discussed are some of the major threats that are posed by the media agencies to India's internal security. And let me warn you, what you have to understand here is that these major issues pertain to the electronic media in India. See, print media has an advantage. The advantage is that it does not have a live effect. So whatever will be published today in the newspaper will only get circulated tomorrow, right? So there is a time lag which is there. But in case of the 24/7 electronic and digital media, the information is transformed and transmitted, transmitted instantly from one place to another. Therefore, there is an even graver risk that is involved to internal security, because the information that may go out at times which is unverified in nature, which is fake in nature, may also cause problems to India's internal security. You have seen that how several media agencies and journalists in India actually rely on WhatsApp forwards for their news. मेरे को लगता है कि इनमें से बहुत सारे जर्नलिस्ट जो हैं वो एक्चुअली जर्नलिज्म करते ही नहीं है, वो व्हाट्सएप के ऊपर अपने ग्रुप्स खोल के देखते हैं कि क्या क्या इन्फॉर्मेशन फॉरवर्ड हुई है, बस उसी इन्फॉर्मेशन को वो अपने ऑडियंसेस को भी बता देते हैं, right? So without verifying that information, without understanding what is the source of the information and so on and so forth. So those are some of the issues that we need to keep in mind when we talk about the various challenges that are posed by the media to India's internal security. And in this, as I mentioned to you, you need to specifically keep in mind that it is the electronic and the digital media where the major channel yes. So there are so many, there is no doubt about it that if you read the print news, that is definitely much more sane and much more responsible as compared to the electronic media. Not to say that the print media also has certain problems associated with it in India today, right? So these are some of the issues that we need to talk about when we talk about the role of media in creating challenges to India's internal security. आपने देखा होगा ना, बड़े सारे लोग कह रहे थे कि 2000 के नोट के अंदर नैनो चिप लगी हुई है, right? That, people get into, imagine, and they even end up discussing these things on the national news channel. That is the amount of gumption that these people have. And the unfortunate reality is that these people continue to do that, and they have a lot of fans also. They are very popular as well, right? It's pretty much like, I mean, I don't want to say this, but even in UPSC coaching, you will find a lot of teachers claiming themselves that we are the best teacher, we know the best, we have the best knowledge in the world, and many of these teachers teach wrong things to the aspirants. रॉन्ग थिंग्स का मतलब फैक्चुअली गलत चीजें पढ़ाते हैं, फैक्चुअली कंसेप्चुअली गलत चीजें पढ़ाई जाती हैं सिमिलर तरीके से. बिकॉज क्या होता है कि आजकल इट्स द इट्स द era of marketing. If you can market well, if you can sell yourself well in that manner, then it doesn't really matter. Everything can be overlooked. Anyway, so that is what we need to keep in mind when we talk about role of media in creating challenges to India's internal security. Now, what is even though I have bashed the media a lot here in the last 15-20 minutes and talking about the challenges that they create to India's internal security, we also need to talk about the positive role that has been played by media in enhancing India's internal security. First and foremost, for example, the busting of the fake lies that is done by the media in the past from our adversary nations or from the various terror groups, extremist group, is something which we need to laud about media. Let's talk about, for example, the Kargil war. Now, the role that Indian media played in swaying the opinion of the entire international community towards India in the Kargil conflict is something which remains to be unparalleled. See, even almost 1.5-2 months into conflict, Pakistan was not ready to accept that it has any direct involvement in Kargil conflict. In fact, Pakistan administration, Pakistan government, Pakistan military kept denying any role in the Kargil conflict. In fact, they kept saying that it is the Mujahid or the terrorists, those who have initiated this. We have nothing to do with this particular conflict that has arisen between because of the occupying of the Indian army posts during the winters, right? So Pakistan kept denying any of such information, and they kept denying that there is any active involvement of their army in the conflict. It was only when the India media houses reached the LOC and interviewed the officers and went around doing their investigation were they able to clearly highlight to rest of the world that there is a clear involvement of the Pakistan National Army in the Kargil conflict. A conflict of such a scale cannot be initiated by a few terrorists or some non-state actors. There is complete connivance of the Pakistani state in this Kargil conflict between India and Pakistan, because for almost a month and a half, pressure was created on India to slow down its aggressive stance against Pakistan, especially because Pakistan has not done any aggression and India is the aggressor country, was the view that was going around the entire world. Indian media agencies played a very crucial role in highlighting this to the world that India is not the aggressor nation, rather it is Pakistan which is the aggressor nation, and India is just trying to defend its status quo territory that used to exist before these posts were occupied by the Pakistani army regulars. So the point I am trying to highlight to you here is that they played a very important role in busting the fake lies that were spread by Pakistan during the Kargil war of 1999. That is one prominent example that you can highlight. Positive role made by media as far as India's internal security is concerned. Even though some of you may say that, sir, this is 22 years old news. Well, what do I do? Because these are the only few instances of positive role that has been played by media can be highlighted by me. Then secondly, they also played a very important role in building a rapport in the international community. Now let me tell you, on August 8th, 1999, something very interesting happened. A patrol plane, I hope you understand what is a patrol plane, right? Which is supposed to do patrolling. A patrol plane of Pakistan Navy lost its way into the Indian airspace by mistake, and the Indian Air Force shot down this patrolling plane of Pakistan Navy for intruding into India's India's airspace. So that was done by the Indian Air Force, which shot down the Pakistan Navy's patrolling plane. Now, to be very honest, It was actually a genuine mistake that was made by the Pakistan Navy, but you have to understand that this was just few days after the Kargil conflict had been called off and the ceasefire had been observed in Kargil conflict, that is on 26th of July 1999. So just a couple of weeks later, a Pakistan Navy patrolling plane wanders into Indian territory. Indian Air Force shots it down without giving any warning to the plane. So Pakistan believed that this is a violation of the various conventions, this is a violation of the basic norms that are supposed to be observed by the nations in the airspace, and therefore they challenged this action of India in the International Court of Justice, ICJ. They went to ICJ and they challenged that India should be punished under the rules and the regulations of the international treaties and conventions by the ICJ because they were wrong in shooting down this Pakistan Navy plane. Now, the initial reaction to this incident of shooting down the Pakistan Navy plane was considered as an act of war or an act of aggression by India on Pakistan by several Western nations. But Indian media highlighted this to the entire international community, played a very significant role in lobbying for the position of India and viewpoint of the Indian government and the Indian Air Force in front of the international community, so much so that ICJ ended up giving its decision in favor of India. So you can understand that at times media can play a very crucial role in enhancing and promoting India's internal security as well. And then of course in dousing the communal fire by improving the trust deficit. See, having said the fact that there are news channels which are involved in trying to inflame the opinion and the sentiments of the people with respect to national security, but we also need to keep in mind that we have some news channels, some journalists, those who have played a very crucial role in trying to develop bonhomie between various sections of the society by trying to improve the trust deficit and also therefore dousing the communal fire and the communal conflicts that exist in India. And then also many journalists, many news channels, many media agencies have also been responsible for busting the propaganda that is spread by the extremists a lot of time in order to win over the population, because it's very important to have a counter propaganda machinery also in order to counter the propaganda that is spread by the extremists related to the various measures that have been or that have not been taken by the government of India related to internal security. So these are some of the things that we need to keep in mind about the positive role that is played by media. But see, what we also need to keep in mind is that what should be done? How do we ensure that the Indian media does not do things or does not perform actions which are contrary to national interest? See, first and foremost, we need to keep it in mind that imposing any kind of an external regulation on media is going to be much more detrimental than the problem itself. Because if you impose regulation by the state or by the government on the media agencies, there is a possibility that it would lead to curbing of the dissent and freedom of speech of the media agencies as well. So then the question arises that how do we counter that? Well, the answer to that lies in self-regulation of the media agencies. Now, you can give example of institutions such as the Press Council of India. There is a Press Council Act and there is a Press Council of India, which is supposed to be a self-regulatory agency for the print media and the press in the country. Similarly, there is a National Broadcaster Standards Authority. There is a Bureau of Editors Association as well. So these organizations can be further strengthened. Their functioning can be monitored and regulated by the government in order to ensure that these organizations, these self-regulating mechanisms that have been created by the media industry can help in regulating the role of media and preventing the damage that can be caused to the national security of the country as a result of the media irresponsible actions by the media groups, etc., and all of those things, right? So that is something that we need to talk about when we talk about what steps can be taken. Then other than that, see, we need to learn from other countries of the world as well. So I have also mentioned here some of the best practices. So some of the best practices of media regulation around the world. In United Kingdom, BBC has exemplary guidelines for terror, war and emergency. So for example, in United Kingdom, they have released a very comprehensive set of guidelines that are supposed to be followed by the various media and the news agencies in the United Kingdom with respect to coverage of anti-terror operations, with respect to coverage of the terror attacks, etc. They should be using exact terminology. Terrorist use करना है तो terrorist ही use होगा, insurgent use नहीं होगा, militant use नहीं होगा. Then at the same time also giving them certain guidelines about what should be the kind of responsibility that the media has in case of terror attacks. They should not try to sensationalize issues. They should not try to give unverified news until unless it has been verified by some government agencies. So these are some of the things. Not try to publish gory images of terror attacks. See, that is also one thing. Even though after Pulwama attacks, a number of gory images of the terror attacks were published, but to be very honest, it does two things. One, it unnecessarily creates a panic in the people, right? सी जो डिसीजन लेना है वो पॉलिटिकल लीडरशिप ऑफ द कंट्री ले लेगी. यहां पे आम लोगों को पानवाड़ी की दुकान के ऊपर खड़े होकर डिसाइड करने की जरूरत नहीं है कि पाकिस्तान के ऊपर बम गिराना है कि नहीं गिराना है. पहली बात. दूसरी बात ये दैट व्हाट इट डज इज दैट इट कैन क्रिएट मेंटल ट्रॉमा आल्सो. इट कैन कॉज मेंटल ट्रॉमा टू सेवरल पीपल एज वेल, राइट? सो दैट इज आल्सो समथिंग दैट वी नीड टू हाईलाइट व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट द exemplary guidelines that have been released by BBC in United Kingdom. Then you can also talk about United States of America enacted an act called as the Patriot Act, which was instituted after the 9/11 attacks, and that gives overriding powers to the government over media agencies in case of national emergency and terror attacks. So in such exceptional and emergency situations, the government can interfere in the functioning of the media agencies as well and ask them to not publish or to stop them from publishing some kind of information or news as well. And then Canada has laid down a detailed code of ethics for the radio and the television news channels with respect to national security issues. Probably it is time for us also to evolve a similar kind of code of ethics that can be implemented in India as well, right? So these are some of the issues that we need to talk about when we talk about the best practices that can be adopted from the best practices of media regulation in the world, right? Across the world जो कुछ best practices हैं उनको इस तरीके से हम adopt कर सकते हैं. So these are some of the things that we need to keep in mind when we talk about role of media in creating challenges to India's internal security. Yes, any questions that you people have related to what we have discussed? Role of media in creating challenges to India's internal security. Okay, fine. So let's proceed further now and let's move to the next topic. So we are done with the topic of basics of cybersecurity. We are done with the topic of role of media and role of social media in creating challenges to India's internal security. The next topic that I will be starting with and that we will be dealing with would be the topic of various security agencies and their mandate. There is already one handout that had been shared with you in the previous class related to this particular topic. I will be referring to that particular handout as well as some of the other things as a part of this particular topic's coverage. So the topic that we are supposed to cover is the various security agencies and their mandate. Now, see, what we need to understand here is that UPSC in mains examination is very, hardly ever concerned about asking you factual details. So you can be rest assured that there is a very less probability of UPSC asking a question on telling about the mandate of the various security agencies in India. Though there is a possibility that UPSC may ask a question about the issues and the current happenings related to the various security agencies in India. So instead of their mandate, we will be largely focusing on the various issues that are associated with the functioning of the various security agencies in India. Now, अगर हम various security agencies in India की बात करेंगे, there are three types of security agencies that we need to specifically focus on. First and foremost, we have what is called as the enforcement agencies. Then we have intelligence agencies, and third agencies are the investigation agencies. Now, in the enforcement agencies, we can discuss about the defense forces, state police forces, and the central armed police forces. In intelligence agencies, I will specifically be discussing with you about RAW, IB, and NTRO, National Technical Research Organization. And then in investigation agencies, two primary investigation agencies. One is CBI and the other one is the NIA, that is the National Investigation Agency, which has been created under National Investigation Agency, NIA Act of 2008. So these are the various security agencies and their mandate. इसके अंदर हम specifically, let's first start with talking about the various central armed police forces in India and what are the challenges associated with the functioning of the central armed police forces in India. But before that, let us try to understand what exactly central armed police forces are. Now see, as such in India, public order, law and order is a state subject. Yes. Public order, law and order is a state subject in India. But under the circumstances that have been created in India, there is a possibility that the central government may also need to interfere in matters related to public order and internal security. If you read Article 355 of the Indian Constitution, it says that it is the responsibility of the Union to protect the states against any external aggression or internal disturbance. This is the responsibility of the Union to do so, that they are supposed to protect the state against the internal disturbance and acts of external aggression. So the question was that if the police is completely under the control of the state and the center is never going to send an army, the center also needs some security forces, some police force at its disposal, under its control, which can be used to supplement and augment the capability of the state police forces. One. Secondly, that would allow the state center in India or that would allow the union in India to fulfill its mandate or to fulfill its role of protecting the states against internal disturbance and external aggression. So over a period of time, center started to create its own central police forces. Central police forces that would be under the control of the center, and as and when required, they would help in the maintenance of law and order in the state and also perform some other functions as well. So central police forces or central armed police forces is what we are going to discuss about. All these central armed police forces in India are under the control and superintendence of Ministry of Home Affairs or the MHA. Now, what are the various central armed police forces? See, if we look at the central armed police forces in India, they can be classified into two categories. One are the central armed police forces in India, which are the border guarding forces. Which are border guarding forces. And then we have some central armed police forces which are non-border guarding forces. So what are the examples of border guarding forces? Border guarding forces would include ITBP, Sashastra Seema Bal, BSF. The non-border guarding forces include the CRPF, the CISF, and the National Security Guards. Now, some people always ask me, sir, what about Assam Rifles and about the Indian Coast Guard? Now, let me tell you, Assam Rifles and Indian Coast Guard actually do not come under CAPF. They are paramilitary forces which are like military, which are very similar to military and the army, but they are still not army. Because जैसे आप अगर देखोगे, for example, the Indian Coast Guard, it is not under the control and the superintendence of the Ministry of Defense like the Indian Navy. Similarly, the Assam Rifles is also not under the control of the Ministry of Defense, but the senior most officer of the Assam Rifles would be someone from the Indian Army only. But the point I am trying to highlight to you here is that the Central Armed Police Forces of India are these: ITBP, Sashastra Seema Bal, BSF, Border Security Force, CRPF, CISF and NSG. All of these organizations were created at different point of times for fulfilling different responsibilities and performing different kind of functions. For example, when I talk about the ITBP was a force that had been created in order to guard the Indian borders with Tibet. And ITBP as a force was specifically created in light of having an high altitude warfare and a border guarding force, especially after the 1962 fiasco. BSF is a force that has been raised with the objective of guarding India's border with Pakistan. But in today's scenario, BSF is also given the responsibility of guarding the border with Bangladesh as well at several places, as well as in northeast with Myanmar as well. And then you have Sashastra Seema Bal, which is also an high altitude warfare kind of a guarding force which has been created and which is supposed to guard India's borders when it comes to Nepal, Bhutan, etc. and so on and so forth. Now, on the CAPF front, when we talk about the non-border guarding forces, we have CRPF. Actually, this is an organization that was created by the colonial masters or by the British in India. CRPF today performs the responsibility of providing the inputs in any kind of law and order outbreak or a public order outbreak that may take place in different parts of the country. Plus, they are also involved very actively in several counter-insurgency operations in Kashmir and in Naxal affected areas. CISF, on the other hand, is one organization that has been created with the objective of providing security to India's PSUs, security to India's public sector establishments. But today CISF's role has increased significantly. It was created to provide protection to India's PSUs, but now it is also involved in protection to the airports in India. It is also involved in protection of Delhi Metro and some important monuments, etc. also in India. CISF has been given the responsibility. It has transformed into completely professional force on that particular front. And then we of course have the NSG, which is a specialist counter-terror force or counter-terrorist operations. They have been raised in order to perform counter-terror operations against the terrorists, right? So this is the broad mandate that we need to discuss about as far as the border guarding forces and the non-border guarding forces in India are concerned. But let us have a detailed look at the mandate of these security forces, and then we will discuss what are the various issues associated with the functioning of these various security forces in India. So see, the handout says that according to the numbers that have been published by the Ministry of Home Affairs, there has been a phenomenal growth in the CAPF numbers. Their total strength as of December 31, 2016 was 9,12,275, of which 2.32% are women. Now, this should itself highlight to you that one of the major problems of the functioning of the CAPF in India is gender inequality and lack of gender representation. Lack of women representation in the Central Armed Police Forces in India. Only 2% of the Central Armed Police Forces personnel are women in India. Then the CRPF alone has a strength of over 3 lakh, while BSF is approaching 2,57,000. CAPF in India comprise of 8 police forces which function under the union government. Earlier they were known as Central Paramilitary Forces. So we have BSF, which is the Border Security Force, comes under Ministry of Home Affairs. We have CRPF, Central Reserve Police Force, Indo-Tibetan Border Police, CISF, Shasastra Seema Bal, and the National Security Guards. Now let's talk about the first one right now, and that is the Border Security Force. So Border Security Force, it was raised in the wake of 1965 war, and to ensure the security of the borders of India and for the matters connected with. BSF has also been instrumental in training of the Mukti Vahini force, which was responsible for the independence of Bangladesh. BSF played a major role in liberation of Bangladesh. It is responsible for guarding India's land border during peacetime and preventing transnational crimes. So not only is it responsible for protecting India's borders, but also the BSF is also responsible for preventing transnational crimes that happen on the border areas. For example, smuggling, for example, trafficking in drugs, for example, trafficking in human beings. All of these issues are taken care of by the BSF. It is responsible for guarding India's land border, etc. The BSF has its own cadre of officers, but its head designated as GG since its formation has been an officer from the Indian Police Service. 2 battalions of BSF located in Kolkata and Guwahati are designated as National Disaster Response Force as well. Now, what are the functions during peace and war? During peace, they are supposed to prevent trans-border crimes, unauthorized entry into exit from territory from India, anti-infiltration operations, collection of trans-border intelligence, as well as preventing smuggling and other illegal trades across the border. What is their role which they are supposed to play during the war time? Well, holding the ground at the assigned LOC, limited action to contain aggression from the force of the enemy so that they can supplement the role of the Indian Army, law and order maintenance in enemy territory, that is administered under army's control, guarding the prisoners of war, guiding the army in border areas, and assistance in control of the refugees, right? So if you see, largely all the border guarding forces, including the BSF, are supposed to perform functions which are very similar to this, is what we will be discussing. Now let's proceed further. Functions performed by the Central Reserve Police Force. If there is one force which can be called to be all-rounder force in all of these border guarding forces in India, then you can say that CRPF is the one. Okay. See, BSF is also deployed a lot of times for election duties as well in India. You keep that as well in mind. CRPF, it is actually the largest central armed police force in the country, and it was found in 1935 as a crown representative. It was used in assimilation of many princely states in India. At the present, CRPF has 195 executive battalions, disaster management battalion, Mahila battalion, parliamentary duty groups, etc. and so on and so forth. When we talk about the functions that are supposed to be performed by the CRPF, assisting states and union territories in police operations to maintain law and order, including in Naxal affected areas, Maoist and insurgency infested regions, and they help in conducting elections throughout the country as well. CRPF also plays a very important role when it comes to taking care of situation during the communal riots. Whenever communal riots break out in the country, you cannot expect that the state police forces will be able to provide the kind of response which is supposed to be given in such situations. Central Reserve Police Force plays a very crucial role, is something that can be highlighted. Then other specialized agencies of CRPF, the Rapid Action Force of CRPF, Cobra is one battalion of CRPF that has been created specifically with the focus of dealing with left-wing extremism. Special anti-Naxal groups that have been trained by the CRPF, Cobra battalion, I discussed this with you earlier, and special duty group and the parliamentary duty group of the CRPF as well. ITBP की अगर हम बात करें, और CRPF जो है वो बॉर्डर एरियाज में डिप्लॉय नहीं की जाती है, तो ये नॉन बॉर्डर गार्डिंग फोर्स के अंदर आता है. इंडो टिबेटन बॉर्डर पुलिस raised in 1962 in the wake of 1962 war. It is deployed in border guarding duties from Karakoram Pass in Ladakh to Jelepla in Arunachal Pradesh, right? ITBP is a special mountaineering force, and most of its officers are professionally trained mountaineers and skiers. So the reason for that is because we realize that we need to have some high altitude warfare, some high altitude border guarding force in India, and that is the function which is supposed to be performed by the ITBP. ITBP's detection and prevention of border violation, preventing a sense of security among the local populace, checking illegal immigration, providing security to sensitive installation, restoring order in the areas of disturbance, disaster management roles, expertise in rescue and relief operations in the mountains, etc. See, ITBP, BSF, SSB perform very similar roles to each other. So you can just make a list of 5-6 of these roles which are performed by ITBP and by the CRPF in India, right? So these are some of the things that we need to keep in mind when we talk about the roles performed by the ITBP and the CRPF. Then we talk about CISF. Came into existence in 1969, was initially having just 3 battalions to provide integrated security to India's public sector undertakings, but it has been made in Armed Force of India by another Act of Parliament passed in 1983. Its current active strength is around 1,44,000. In a span of 4 decades, the force has grown several folds to reach 1,48,000. So and so personnel. With the globalization and liberalization of economy, CISF is no longer a PSU-centric organization. Instead, it has become a premier multi-skilled security agency of the country, mandated to provide security to major critical infrastructure installations of the country in diverse areas. We discussed about this, right? See, I am just reading these particular things to make you accustomed that जो भी हमने डिस्कस किया वही है, इसके अंदर कुछ बहुत ज्यादा साइंटिफिक नॉलेज नहीं है. मेजर जो हमारा फोकस होगा वो होगा इश्यूज डिस्कस करने पे of the border guarding forces, issues of non-border guarding forces, issues associated with the functioning of the intelligence agencies in India. Mandate aspect is very simple. As you can see, there is not a lot of rocket science that is involved in the mandate of the various security forces. तो यहाँ पे CISF के कुछ functions भी दिए हुए हैं. सशस्त्र सीमा बल, the SSB is mandated to guard Indo-Nepal, Indo-Bhutan borders. It is also entrusted with the responsibility to counter left-wing extremism in states of Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, etc. and so on and so forth. Functions again the same. And then you have the National Security Guard. This was a special force that was created with the objective of providing counter-terror operations, combating the terrorist activities, hostage situations, etc. and so on and so forth. So that is what the National Security Guard is supposed to perform. So even during the Mumbai attacks of 26/11 that I was discussing, NSG played a very crucial role. Now, let's talk about what are the problems that are associated with the functioning of the Central Armed Police Forces in India. So this is what we will be discussing, the problems associated with the CAPF. CAPF की functioning के साथ क्या क्या issues या problems associated है, that is the topic that we will be discussing today. Now, what are the various issues associated with the functioning of the CAPF in India? See, first and foremost, let's look at the issues from the human resource perspective. Okay, what are the human resource related issues that are there in the functioning of the CAPF in India? First and foremost, what you can mention is that there is a shortage of workforce, severe shortage of workforce in the functioning of the Central Armed Police Forces in India. In the year 2012, there was a report that was published that between 2012 to 2010, more than 40,000 personnel resigned from the Central Armed Police Forces. So there is shortage of workforce, and this shortage of workforce is fueled by the fact that not a lot of people, those who are working in the Central Armed Police Forces, are happy with their jobs, are happy with their working conditions, are happy about the kind of facilities and amenities that they have been provided. So shortage of workforce in the functioning of the Central Armed Police Forces is one aspect that can be highlighted by you when we talk about the human resource related aspect of the Central Armed Police Forces in India. Then other than that, when we talk about the Central Armed Police Forces in India and their functioning, when it comes to the shortage of the workforce is one. The second issue that you can talk about is the staff is overworked. They are overworked. Okay. So not only are they understaffed, but they are overworked as well. Now it is said that often the leave applications of the personnel of the Central Armed Police Forces are rejected time and again simply because they do not have enough staff. Let me tell you one particular story that I always tell to all the students. Once there was a former chief of ITBP, Indo-Tibetan Border Police, a former IPS officer. He happened to be called on a TV show on Rajya Sabha TV, and he said that when I was a young officer and when I had been deputed to ITBP, I then saw the then DG of ITBP crying and having tear in his eyes. So I walked up to him and I asked him that, sir, what is the problem? Why do you seem to have some kind of this emotional run, and why are you crying? So he said that, see, today what has happened is that there was this one soldier, one Jawan of the ITBP who came to my office, and this person on his uniform, he had pinned a 1-year-old frock, एक छोटे बच्चे की फ्रॉक जो है वो उसने अपनी यूनिफॉर्म के ऊपर पिन कर ली थी. So when I looked at it, I got very furious and I started shouting at him. And I told him that I will, take action against you and I will initiate disciplinary proceedings against you. I will throw you out of the force and so on and so forth. And then this person responded to the ITBP chief that, sir, it is better that you dismiss me from the service, because that way at least I can go and visit my daughter, whose face I have not seen for last 1.5 years since she has been born. So the ITBP chief asked him that, why have you not gone and seen your daughter? So he said that, sir, I've been coming to your office for last 1.5 years with an application for leave, but every single time my leave application has been rejected. For 1.5 years since my wife has given birth to my daughter, I have not seen the face of my daughter. So what else do I do than to register my protest for not being approved of my leaves rather than wearing the frock of my 1-year-old child which I had bought for her. So this is when the ITBP chief heard this story, he was completely shattered and in emotions, and he said that he broke down in front of this young officer who later on went on to become the chief of ITBP, and he said that, see, I really wish that there was a way in which I could have approved of the leaves, and I didn't need to let go of the leaves of this particular person, but unfortunately there is not much which I can do because we are overworked and understaffed. We are not having enough staff to perform the duties of the office, and therefore I have to constantly reject the leave applications of various personnel which keep coming to me. So overworked, shortage of the workforce. Then you can also talk about that the motivation of the Central Armed Police Forces officers is also one of the major issues, and you can here talk about these frequent resignations. You can also talk about the mental stress that is involved in a job such as that of the mental stress that is involved in a job that is such of the Central Armed Police Forces. So the amount of mental stress that is also involved is also huge. There have been a large number of suicides that have happened in the Central Armed Police Forces. That is one thing that can be highlighted by you. You can also talk about how there have been instances of violence between the people or between the personnel of the Central Armed Police Forces also, again probably because of a lot of pressure, etc. and so on and so forth. So that is one of the issues that can be highlighted by you. Then on the HR front, you can also talk about the poor training facilities. Most of the training facilities of the Central Armed Police Forces are not upgraded, are not state-of-art infrastructure. So if you do not train them properly, if you do not really provide them proper training and capacity or capability to deal with the various internal security situations, you cannot expect them to deliver their best. So poor training facilities is also something that can be highlighted by you, right? Though HR front ke upar ye ho gaya, then we can also talk about various issues associated with the Central Armed Police Forces on the operational front. There are various issues on operational front as well with the functioning of the Central Armed Police Forces in India. So what you can mention here is that Central Armed Police Forces में आप अच्छा HR के अंदर आप एक चीज और mention कर सकते हो. You can talk about lack of avenues for promotion. See, the officers of Central Armed Police Forces are not given such frequent promotions and such frequent upgradations as the officers of the Indian Police Service, right? Plus, you have to understand the amount of risk that is involved in the job of a Central Armed Police Forces personnel is definitely much more than that of risk. So they expect that they should be given more allowances, they should be given better perks and salaries and privileges as well. That is also not the case, which we need to keep in mind, right? Operational issues के अंदर हम क्या कह सकते हैं? We can talk about over dependence of states on Central Armed Police Forces for law and order situation. Over dependence of the states on Central Armed Police Forces for law and order situations is another aspect that can be highlighted by you. See, it is often said that now states have become so used to getting the Central Armed Police Forces deployed in their region, in their territory, in case of any law and order breakdown, etc., that they have stopped paying attention to their own state police forces, because a lot of states believe that when the center is anyway going to send forces for us to ensure the law and order enforcement, etc., why do we need to invest in our state police forces? One specific example is something that can be seen in case of Naxalism. I discussed with you that how states treat Naxalism as a problem of the center, and they believe that the center will anyway send its own security forces. So why do we need to invest in upgrading the infrastructure, capability, capacity of our state police forces? We don't need to do that. So that is another aspect that can be highlighted by you. Over dependence of the states on the central armed police forces for law and order situation is also something that can be highlighted by you when we talk about the operational issues associated with the central armed police forces. Then the other aspect that you can also talk about is that central armed police forces, one of the major operational issues is that the leadership of central armed police forces is often from the IPS. Now, this aspect of para-dropping the officers of the IPS into central armed police forces does not go down well with the cadre of the central armed police forces. Their cadre feels demotivated. You will see that most of the DGs of central armed police forces in India are IPS. Actually, this began as a trend when these central armed police forces were created, because you needed some credible leadership, and IPS was readily available for providing leadership to these organizations. But now, today, when these organizations are 40-year-old, 50-year-old, and when people are being recruited at the young age of 22, 23 as assistant commandants in these organizations, and then they grow up through the ranks and go on to such senior position, why should they not be given opportunity to lead these organizations? Why should IPS officers, those who do not have an understanding of the culture, those who do not have an understanding of the requirements of the organization, problems of the organizations, be made to lead these organizations? See, the logic to give behind this by several people is that IPS officers are more capable. Who says that they are more capable than the CAPF cadre personnel? See, a CAPF cadre personnel has also qualified a competitive examination, has got into service, has spent 20-30 years in that organization, knows the organization from within completely. How can you compare him with a person who spent his 20-30 years in a district or in the state? He does not really know the problems of the central armed police forces. You cannot be asking them to lead the central armed police forces organization simply because they are IPS officers. So this is also one aspect that can be talked about, that the leadership of the central armed police forces in India is the IPS, which is a severe demotivator, which affects the morale and the motivation of the cadre personnel in the central armed police forces. So that is also something that can be highlighted by you when we talk about operational issues associated with the functioning of the central armed police forces in India. And then at times it has also been reported that there is shortage of weaponry, and there is also pathetic living conditions, or you can talk about poor accommodation or poor living conditions, accommodation and poor living conditions in the barracks of the central armed police forces. You would remember that there was this person, I think his name was Tej Bahadur or something like that, from the BSF, who had whose video had gone viral on social media, where he had shown the kind of food and the kind of supplies that they were being provided in the barracks of the central armed police forces in really harsh conditions on the border areas. Now, unfortunately, if you would know that BSF ended up taking an action, a disciplinary action against this person instead of actually resolving the issue, right? So, shortage of weaponry, poor accommodation. आपको मैंने पहले ही बताया था that maximum deaths that occur in Naxal affected areas actually occur due to malaria, right? They do not occur due to the guns of the Naxalites, but they happen due to malaria. So you can imagine the kind of poor living conditions that exist in these areas, right? So that is also something that can be talked about here when we talk about the problems of the central armed police forces, operational issues as well with their functioning. Then you can also talk about another issue, that because of their constant deployment from one area to another, and because they are not given any breaks, there is hardly any time for recuperation, rest, as well as training of these सेंट्रल आर्म पुलिस फोर्सेस पर्सनल, तो ये भी एक इशू आप हाईलाइट कर सकते हो, राइट। अगर आप कॉन्स्टेंटली एक जगह से दूसरी जगह आपकी पोस्टिंग होती रहेगी हर समय, तो हाउ आर यू गोइंग टू इंश्योर दैट यू गेट टाइम फॉर रिक्यूपरेशन एंड रेस्ट, एंड हाउ आर यू गोइंग टू इंश्योर दैट you get time for training as well, right? So that is also something which needs to be highlighted when we talk about problems associated with the central armed police forces in India and their functioning, right? So these are some of the issues that have been highlighted here. Let's look at what are the reforms that have been mentioned here as far as the functioning of the CAPF is concerned. So first and foremost, there was a committee, Murli Manohar Joshi committee on the functioning of the central armed police forces in India, that recommended that there is a heavy dependence of the states on central armed police forces. Even for everyday law and order issues, this was likely to affect the anti-insurgency and border guarding operations, beside curtailing the training needs of these forces. So the recommendation that has been provided is that there is a need to augment the capacity of the state police forces and reduce the dependence. Training of the CAPF, the committee noted that there is an urgent need to update the curriculum and infrastructure training in the training institute for CAPF, which is outdated. So it is recommended that while purchasing state-of-art equipment, government should ensure that training needs are taken care of, and if needed, it may be included in the purchase agreement itself. Modernization of CAPF is something which has been pending for a really long time. Promotion of CAPF, the committee observed that top positions in CAPF are occupied by IPS officers. This has a demoralizing effect on the officers of the CAPF and impacts the effectiveness of the forces. The committee recommended that the top position should be filled from their respective cadre for the CAPF, right? Then housing for the CAPF, the committee noted that during 12 5-year plan, as against the target of 24,000 houses for the CAPF, only 11,000 houses have been created. Then intelligence gathering. The committee noted that there is a need to improve the intelligence gathering mechanism, which should be strengthened and modernized within the shortest possible time frame. Present intelligence gathering mechanism of the central armed police forces is so outdated. It can be highlighted from the fact that there have been so many instances of the attack on the convoy on the central armed police forces by the Naxalites, and the central armed police forces were not having any knowledge or any information about the same, right? This shows lack of the professional approach in functioning of the central armed police forces, as well as lack of intelligence gathering mechanisms. And then, of course, stress among CAPF personnel. The committee noted a number of CAPF personnel have committed suicide. It recommended that workshops in stress management should regularly be undertaken, and yoga and meditation should be made part of daily exercise of the CAPF personnel. Further, the committee emphasized the need of accommodation near the deployment of respective force to enable personnel to meet their family members. And then, of course, there are some other things also that have been highlighted by the committee on the issues associated with this. Now, if I will to tell you something, I have also shared one document in the handouts today, and that is basically a report by the PRS on the functioning of the central armed police forces in India. This is basically nothing but the summary of the report of the Murli Manohar Joshi committee, राइट तो यही इश्यूज यहां पर भी मेंशन्ड है. इसको आप एक बार आप थोड़ा सा और डिटेल में पढ़ना चाहो तो आप यहां से भी पढ़ सकते हो, राइट. एनीवे दे हैव बीन मेंशन्ड इन द हैंडआउट. So these are the problems that are associated with the functioning of the central armed police forces and the reforms that are required. Now, there was a committee whose chairperson was P. Chidambaram, and that gave certain recommendations with respect to the problems associated with the non-border guarding forces as well, and the non-border guarding central armed police forces of India as well. So we will discuss that. But before I venture into that, and before I go there, before I discuss some of these recommendations that were made by the committee, any questions or any doubts that you have related to what we have discussed? So possibly a question that can be asked in the mains examination is, what are the various issues associated with the functioning of central armed police forces in India, and what are the reforms that are required in improving their functioning or to make them more professional, etc. and so on and so forth. तो इस तरीके का कोई क्वेश्चन आपसे यूपीएससी मेंस एग्जामिनेशन में पूछ सकती है. यस, प्लीज टेल मी. ओके, नो क्वेरीज. नाउ सी, यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड वन थिंग. बार बार मैं जो एक बात बोल रहा हूं आपको, जो फैक्चुअल एस्पेक्ट्स है ना, वो ऑलरेडी उन हैंडआउट्स में शेयर्ड है, आप उनको पढ़ सकते हो. 50 तरीके के सोर्सेज मिल जाएंगे पढ़ने के लिए, समझने के लिए, बीएसएफ का इसमें रोल क्या होता है, सीआईएसएफ का क्या रोल होता है, ये सब होता है। बट यूपीएससी ना कोई आपसे थीसिस नहीं मांगेगी मेंस एग्जामिनेशन में, जहां पे वो आपको बोलेगी बीएसएफ के रोल को इलैबोरेटली डिस्कस करो या सीआईएसएफ के रोल को इलैबोरेटली डिस्कस करो। वो एक्सपेक्ट करेंगे कि थोड़ा बहुत आप इंफॉर्मेशन दे दीजिए, यू गिव अ बिट ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन, एंड रेस्ट ऑफ द थिंग्स यूपीएससी वुड एक्सपेक्ट दैट द क्वेश्चंस विल बी मोर सेंटर्ड अराउंड the issues associated with the functioning of the CAPF in India. Okay, so that is what we need to keep in mind कि क्वेश्चन जो मेंस एग्जामिनेशन में पूछे जाते हैं ना, वो कैसे क्वेश्चंस पूछे जाते हैं वो देखना बहुत जरूरी है. यू पीपल नीड टू स्पेंड टाइम to look at the kind of questions that are being asked. Questions are never factual. Questions would be more analysis oriented. Prelims exam में हो सकता है कि they may ask you some factual or fact related question, but that is only there in prelims examination. Mains में most of the questions would be much more analytical in nature is what we need to keep in mind. Anyway, so what are the observations and the recommendations of the committee on the non-border guarding Central Armed Police Forces that was formed under the leadership of P. Chidambaram? First and foremost, this committee suggested, let's look at these recommendations now. This committee suggested that the severe stagnation is taking place at the Group B and Group C of CISF due to lack of cadre review. So there are problems at the level of constable, head constable, sub-inspector. It says that, for example, the committee reported that a constable gets promoted to head constable in 22 years as against the eligibility period of 5 years. Why is this happening? Because cadre management has not been done properly. So there is a requirement for managing the cadre in a much more professional manner when it comes to the Central Armed Police Forces, right? So the committee stated that lack of cadre review is a demoralizing factor for CISF personnel. I was already talking to you about lack of avenues for promotion. In this context, it is recommended that cadre review of Group B and Group C personnel must be expedited so that the lower ranks get their first promotion within 10 years of recruitment. The second recommendation of the committee was with respect to the modernization of the non-border guarding forces. The committee said that CISF, which is the body which is responsible for security of airports, installations of the industrial installations, etc., does not have access to modern equipment such as drones, night vision devices, patrolling equipment, etc. Committee also said that CISF does not have dedicated bomb detection and disposal squad as well, and therefore it said that we need to upgrade their capacity on this particular front as well. CRPF के बारे में कमिटी ने बोला that the rationale for reserving 37 posts for IPS officers, they questioned that when they were not opting for such posts, these posts remained vacant or were temporarily diverted to cadre officers of the CRPF. The committee recommended that not more than, ये बड़ा important aspect है, not more than 25% of the posts should be reserved for IPS officers. And it said that there are more than 55,000 vacancies at constable position in CRPF. It said that we need to have a recruitment drive in place that will take into account vacancies for the next 2 years. Recruit enough so that you are able to take care of this void that exists as far as the Central Armed Police Forces are concerned. Now, deployment. The committee also observed that states are over dependent on the CRPF for maintaining various law and order situation. हमने discuss किया ही था. This continuous deployment of training company affects the operational efficiency of CRPF as well as denies them training and rest as well. ये मैंने आपको अभी बताया था. The committee recommended that at any given time, 1/6 of battalion should be mandatorily training or be given rest. See, even the forces of Alexander the Great required rest. अगर अलेक्जेंडर ने अपने फोर्सेस के रेस्ट के बारे में ध्यान दिया होता तो शायद वो सच में दुनिया को कब्जा करके he could have ruled the entire world. But it was because of the lack of rest and the fatigue that had crept into the soldiers of Alexander's forces that he was not able to win the war any longer, right? Research and development, the committee also said that CRPF does not have a dedicated research and development wing of its own. It has recommended that due to unique issues faced by CRPF such as large size and areas of deployment, creation of a dedicated R&D unit should be explored to deal with issues peculiar to CRPF such as improvisation, explosive devices and bulletproofing of the vehicles, etc. So instead of depending on external agencies, try and develop the R&D expertise of CRPF itself so that it can develop these particular devices and particular features which are required for its functioning. NSG के रिस्पेक्ट में भी रिपोर्ट ने कुछ बोला है, क्या बोला है? The committee has said that NSG does not have its own cadre. ये बड़ा important issue है. And draws personnel from army, CAPF and other police organizations. However, the period of deputation of army personnel in the NSG is very short. In this context, the committee has recommended that a working group should try and explore the pros and cons of a longer tenure for deputation as well as having the own cadre for the NSG so that they are not dependent on the army or they are not dependent on the other CAPF for their personnel. And then they said that NSG के पास खुद का air wing नहीं है. It is dependent on the air assets of the other forces. If we want to provide swift action in cases of the terrorist operations, counter-terror operations, the committee recommended that steps must be taken for commissioning a dedicated air wing for the NSG as well. So these are some of the specific issues that can be highlighted by you when we talk about the issues associated with the non-border guarding forces in India related to the internal security of the country and related to the Central Armed Police Forces. Right? So we have discussed till now what? Till now we have discussed the various issues associated with the functioning of the Central Armed Police Forces in India. Right? This is the topic that we have discussed. Once we are back from the break, means we go into a break now. And once we are back from the break, I will discuss the issues associated with the functioning of the intelligence agencies in India. And then I will discuss the issues associated with the functioning of the state police forces in India. Okay, CBI, NIA, etc. fall into the domain of paper 2. So I'm guessing that that would have already been covered by in your polity governance classes. Also, on the state police forces also, actually that also falls into law and order and paper 2. But उसके बारे में हम थोड़ा सा एक brief discussion कर लेंगे. And then we will move on to the other topics. We will move on to the topic of border management, right? So if you have any questions, if you have any queries associated with whatever we have discussed till now, any doubts that are lingering in your mind, please feel free to send the questions to the class coordinator. I will take them up after the break, right? So I'll see you after the break in a few minutes. In case there are any queries and questions, please send it to the class coordinator. Okay, no questions from whatever we have discussed till now? No queries? Right. Now, the next, set of enforcement or the security agencies that we need to talk about that create challenges to India's internal security is the intelligence agencies of India. So see, in the intelligence agencies, so we have three major intelligence agencies in India. The first one is the Intelligence Bureau. The second one is the research and the analysis wing, which is the RAW. And the third one is the National Technical Research Organization, an organization that was created very recently in the year 2004. All these three organizations are supposed to have different areas and different domains of functioning, but despite that, because there is no legal framework, there is no law that governs the functioning of these organizations, there is no law that really lays down the functions that are supposed to be performed by these particular organizations, there is often a confusion and there is an overlapping of the functions as well. The Intelligence Bureau is the oldest of all of these three, which was actually created again by the British, and this organization was created in 1887 as Central Special Branch by the Secretary of the State for India in London. Now, till 1968, this was the only intelligence agency that we used to have in India. In 1968, in the aftermath of the failure of intelligence in 1962 as well as 1965 war, we ended up creating an organization such as the which is called as the Research and the Analysis Wing, which is basically nothing but RAW. Till 1968, intelligence agency which used to perform all the intelligence functions was Intelligence Bureau, but after 1968, what has been done is that all the matters pertaining to domestic intelligence within the country, any intelligence inputs that are supposed to be collected, both on the technical intelligence front as well as on the human intelligence front, that is intelligence that is being collected through the human network and intelligence that is being collected through the technical resources, tapping, etc., and all of that, all those were in the under the control of the Intelligence Bureau. Since 1968, they take care of the domestic part of the intelligence. Because there was a failure of our intelligence agencies to preempt the attack as far as the intelligence in 1962 war is concerned, or 1965 war is concerned, the intelligence architecture of India was split into two, where the research and the analysis wing, which is the RAW, was created in the year 1968 to take care of the external agency issues or external intelligence issues. So if there is any intelligence gathering that is supposed to be done outside India or pertaining to India's defense, then that would be done by the RAW, and any domestic intelligence inputs would be provided by the NIA. Right? So when we look at the functioning by the functioning of the IB, not NIA. So IB, Intelligence Bureau, is authoritatively controlled by Ministry of Home Affairs. It comes under the control of the Ministry of Home Affairs, and it is considered as the internal news agency that is responsible, internal intelligence agency, not news agency, responsible for monitoring all the aspects of the governance. Major functions of IB can be classified as counterintelligence, counter-terrorism, VIP security, anti-secession activities, intelligence collection in border areas, etc., and so on and so forth. That is what we need to understand about Intelligence Bureau. Research and Analysis Wing, or the RAW, was created in the year 1968. Right? And this organization was created with the objective of gathering the intelligence from outside India. So it says that thereafter India established a dedicated RAW, which is founded mainly to keep an eye on the actions and movements of Pakistan and China, and it is not liable to the Parliament of India on many issues, and it monitors the political and military development in the neighboring countries, which have a direct bearing on India's national security and in the genesis of its foreign policy as well. In the year 2004, it was considered important that we need to have one organization, one intelligence agency to be created specifically for collection of the technical inputs, technical intelligence inputs as well. So there are two segments of intelligence collection, right? One is the human intelligence that you collect through the network of your human informers, etc., and so on and so forth. And then the other part of intelligence is the intelligence that you collect through the technical sources. For that particular purpose, in the year 2004, we enacted a new organization. We created a new organization, and that was called as the NTRO. Now, the interesting thing is that when we look at the functioning of the IB IB comes under Ministry of Home Affairs. The research and the analysis wing or the RAW comes under the control and the superintendence of the, it comes under the control and the, जब हम RAW की बात करेंगे, it comes under control and superintendence of the Prime Minister's office. Okay, actually it is the DOP, you know, the Prime Minister's office, not DOPT, sorry. The Prime Minister's office has the overall control over the functioning of the RAW. And when we talk about NTRO, NTRO as an organization is also under the National Security Advisor's office in the Prime Minister's office under the overall control and the superintendence of the Prime Minister of India, set up in 2004. What is the function which is supposed to be performed by the NTRO or the National Technical Research Organization? It develops technology capabilities in aviation and remote sensing, data gathering, processing, cyber security, cryptology systems, etc. and all of these things. And it also has access to data from some of the satellites. Now the question is that we have three major intelligence agencies in India that have been created, but despite that we continue to witness intelligence failures in India. See, Pulwama attacks was a direct result of intelligence failure. Similarly, when we talk about the Uri attacks, you know what happened in Uri, that was also a result of intelligence failure. Similarly, when we talk about the various attacks that have taken place on the Central Armed Police Forces in Naxal affected areas, or the various intelligence failures that have happened in Northeast, is all attributed to the failure of the intelligence agencies in India to be not able to perform their functions in a proper manner. So what exactly are the shortcomings of the intelligence agencies in India and problems associated with their functioning? So let us try to understand what are the various issues associated with the functioning of the intelligence agencies in India. Okay, so when we talk about the issues associated with functioning of various intelligence agencies in India, issues associated with the functioning of intelligence agencies in India. Now the first issue that we need to highlight here under the issues associated with the functioning of intelligence agencies in India is the amount of infighting and lack of coordination So it is often seen that these intelligence agencies in India are involved in a turf war with each other. See, no one wants their powers and their functions to be taken away from them and to be given away to someone else. So when we talk about intelligence agencies in India, what has been done is that RAW was carved out of the IB, and then NTRO was further carved out of the functions of IB and the RAW. So there is a constant infighting that keeps taking place among these organizations, especially because of the fact that they have ego tussles with each other. So there are every organization, IB is trying to look down upon and trying to downplay the achievements of the NTRO. NTRO is trying to downplay the achievements of the RAW, and RAW will be trying to downplay the achievements of the IB. So there is a lot of infighting that is happening among these organizations, and there is lack of coordination. Now what you need to understand is that something which I've been telling to you from the beginning of these internal security classes. The terrorists, the extremists, the Naxalites, the insurgents are functioning in a solid, comprehensive manner as one. They are functioning as a part of one group, one organization. And when you compare them to the intelligence agencies, there the situation is very different. Intelligence agencies in India are not functioning as one. So there are bound to be lapses, there are bound to be problems that will be created in intelligence creation because of lack of coordination between these organizations in fighting. You can also talk about that how there is lack of role clarity for each of these organizations in absence of any law that has been enacted to clearly delineate the roles and the responsibilities of each of the organization. Okay, so that is something that we need to keep in mind, lack of role clarity, right, which often leads to overlapping functions among these organizations, right, overlapping functions. And see, you have to understand that whenever there is no clarity on who is supposed to perform a certain function, it would always lead to dereliction of duty. अगर मैं आपको काम दूं, मैं आपको बोलूं कि यार असाइनमेंट पूरा कर दो, आपकी पूरी क्लास ने मिलकर इस असाइनमेंट को पूरा करना है, अगर पूरी क्लास ने असाइनमेंट को मिलकर पूरा नहीं किया तो मैं किसी एक आदमी को तो रिस्पॉन्सिबल होल्ड नहीं कर सकता, मैं पूरी क्लास को भी रिस्पॉन्सिबल होल्ड नहीं कर सकता, तो मैं क्या करूं, सबको डिसमिस कर दूं, सबको पढ़ाना छोड़ दूं? यू कांट डू दैट. Same is the situation here also. Whenever there will be too many people, see, everyone's accountability is no one's accountability. Everyone's responsibility always and always translates into no one's responsibility, right? So lack of role clarity and overlapping functions between these organizations is also something that we need to talk about the issues associated with the functioning of intelligence agencies in India. Then other than that, we also need to talk about the fact, when we talk about the intelligence agencies in India and the various issues that are associated with their functioning, you need to talk about lack of an oversight mechanism. Now see, all these intelligence agencies are under the control of the executive in India. There is no kind of legislative or an impartial oversight mechanism over the functioning of these intelligence agencies. As a result, what tends to happen is that often these agencies are misused for meeting the political goals and serving the political purposes of the party in power. Right? So that is another thing. So lack of an oversight mechanism creates lack of accountability for these organizations, because the only accountability that they have is towards the executive. So there is not much of a clarity on how these organizations are running. See, you need to understand one thing. Ultimately, all these organizations are being sponsored by your and my taxpayers' money, right? So it is important for us to know at least something about the functioning of these organizations, how the money is being spent. The counter argument is that, see, these organizations are supposed to remain clandestine and undercover, otherwise how will they perform their functions? But you have to also understand the fact that these organizations, because there is an oversight mechanism lacking, there is lack of accountability. The only accountability that they have is to the executive. There is no legislative accountability of these organizations. Now let me tell you why am I highlighting this point. If you look at some of the most important intelligence agencies across the world, when you look at the MI5, when you look at the CIA, etc., and various other intelligence agencies of the world, you will find in most of the democratic countries of the world, there is a mechanism for legal oversight or legislative oversight over these agencies. There is some kind of a legislative oversight over the functioning of these organizations. But in India, it is completely under the control of the executive, and that is what you will be highlighting, that several times these organizations or intelligence agencies have been accused of promoting narrow political interest instead of focusing on the issues associated with the functioning of with the intelligence collection, with internal security, lot of these intelligence agencies, especially IB, has been considered to be very notorious that how it is used by the ruling party at the center in order to conduct some kind of snooping on its political adversaries, who is going where, who is sitting where, who is sleeping where, whose girlfriend is whom, who is hanging out with whom, who is meeting whom, etc. and so on and so forth. So rather than trying to focus on national security issues, the intelligence bureau has been accused of promoting narrow political interests of the political party in power, and therefore it is misused for political purposes. So that is also something that can be highlighted by you when we talk about issues associated with the functioning of intelligence agencies in India. Then other than this, what we can also talk about is, when we talk about issues associated with the functioning of intelligence agencies in India, you can also mention about that there is shortage of workforce. Shortage of workforce as far as the intelligence agencies are concerned, right? So shortage of workforce के ऊपर अगर हम बात करेंगे तो इसमें एक और aspect आपको mention करने की जरूरत है. You can mention that it has been highlighted from time to time that the intelligence agencies in India are lacking the requisite workforce, not only on the overall workforce terms, but especially they have not been able to attract talent for technical intelligence collection. See, you need to understand one thing. Technical intelligence is something which is not a cakewalk, or it is not a child's play. You require people, those who are expert in forensics. You require people, those who are experts in cyber security. You require people, those who are experts in new technology. But these intelligence agencies in India are severely short on the technical manpower. Not only short on workforce in general, but they are short on technical manpower also when it comes to intelligence collection, which severely hampers their functioning, right? So what are the various issues? We can summarize them as follows: infighting and lack of coordination, turf wars between the various intelligence agencies, lack of role clarity, overlapping functions leading to dereliction of duty, leading to lack of accountability. There is lack of an oversight mechanism, especially there is no legal or legislative oversight over the functioning of these organizations. They are often accused of promoting the narrow political interest of the ruling party in power, and a shortage of workforce, that is, they've not been able to attract the talent for technical intelligence collection, experts in forensics, experts in cyber security, etc. and so on and so forth. So these are some of the issues associated with the functioning of the intelligence agencies in India, and that is what has been highlighted here as well. If you see, it says infighting among the agencies, lack of coordination, lack of oversight and accountability, used for political purposes, short on resources, and lack of transparency in their functioning. So what are the reforms that are required in the functioning of the intelligence agencies in India? Let's have a look at them quickly, right? Various reforms that are required in functioning of intelligence agencies in India. First and foremost, intelligence agencies must be provided a legal framework for their existence and functioning, and their functioning must be under parliamentary oversight and scrutiny. See, some of the people say that this is going to create problems in the functioning of these organizations, because everything which will be happening in the parliament would then be known to the people, and then these organizations will not be able to work behind the closed doors. Well, the answer to that is that probably you can create a parliamentary committee that will be given the overall responsibility of the oversight over these particular intelligence agencies. So that is something that can be highlighted by you. Then you can also talk about reforms in the recruitment and training processes of their personnel, their pay structures and career progression to attract the best talent available in the country. Can we make a situation where we can start getting some of the best minds in the country, including the technical experts, to be recruited in these intelligence agencies in India, so that we can upgrade their capability and capacity? Recruitment to these agencies should be broad-based, so that experts from myriad fields such as science, technology, IT, communication could be brought in, rather than reserving these agencies exclusively for the police. So right now, if you look at the recruitment to RAW, if you look at recruitment to IB, etc., then you will realize that the recruitment actually happens from the Indian police services or from the state police services. So perhaps there is a requirement to bring in a reform there as well, and to open up the recruitment for the people from the outside as well. Then there should be a single authority exercising supervisory and other control over intelligence agencies. Now see, what you need to understand here is, some people have been saying that presently intelligence agencies in India are under control and superintendence of various ministries. There is Ministry of Home Affairs that is involved. There is Ministry of the Prime Minister's Office that is involved. Can we put it under one single agency here? And also it is said that what that will do is that it will help in coordinating with the state police forces and the various security agencies as well with respect to dissemination of the intelligence. See, collection of intelligence is one thing, but acting on the intelligence inputs is also very, very important, right? Look at what happened in case of 26/11 attacks. David Hadley had made his way into India multiple number of times, but despite all of that, no alarm was raised over this person walking into India so many times. And even when intelligence inputs had been shared by the central intelligence agencies with the state police of Maharashtra, they failed to act on that commensurately. What does this show? It shows that there is coordination lacking between the state police forces and the security agencies and the ones that are supposed to be involved in gathering of the intelligence. So how can that be ensured? We put all of this under the control of one nodal person or one nodal agency who would be responsible for intelligence collection, intelligence gathering, etc., and then disseminating it to the security agencies within time. And therefore that has been mentioned that there should be a single authority exercising supervisory and other control over the intelligence agencies. It could be the National Security Advisor in a modified role, Director of National Intelligence, or even a Minister for National Intelligence answerable to the Parliament. Then we need to foster a culture of transparency among the functioning of these intelligence agencies. One of the ways for fostering the culture of transparency could be bringing the intelligence agencies under the control of the parliamentary oversight or some parliamentary committee. Probably something like that could be done. And then greater empowerment of intelligence officials should be accompanied by a simultaneous strengthening of the oversight over the functioning of these intelligence agencies as well in India. So these are some of the reforms that can be suggested by you when we talk about the intelligence architecture in India and intelligence agencies in India. I have been expecting a question related to intelligence agencies in the mains examination for quite few years now, for a couple of years at least, and probably in the coming years you may see a question related to the functioning of the intelligence agencies and what are the reforms that are required in the functioning of the intelligence agencies in India also going ahead in the future, right? So that is something which we can expect as a question going ahead in the future, right? Any questions that you have related to the functioning of intelligence agencies in India and issues associated with their functioning? Yes, issues associated with the functioning of intelligence agencies in India. Any queries or any questions related to this particular topic, please feel free to ask. No questions? Now, let's proceed further, and we will now talk about the various issues associated with the functioning of the police agencies in India or the state police forces in India. Okay, what are the various challenges that are there? इस हैंडआउट के अंदर अगर आप देखोगे तो मैंने कुछ issues associated with the CBI we mentioned किए हुए हैं, right? Some issues associated with the CBI etc. have also been mentioned here. So you please read through them once. NIA was created in the year 2004 for providing the investigation in counter-terrorist operations and in any of the terrorist-related activities. So that is something that we need to keep in mind. And then, of course, the Central Bureau of Investigation के बारे में थोड़ा बहुत information है. Problems associated with CBI मैंने यहाँ पे mention किया हुआ है. इसको आप खुद से अपने आप से पढ़ लीजिएगा. You will be able to understand all of these things on your own. Now, let's move to the topic of the various issues associated with the functioning of the state police forces in India. Any questions? कोई questions नहीं है? Now, let's talk about the issues associated with the functioning of various state police forces in India. Now let me tell you something. In India, so many committees have been made by the government with respect to bringing in police reforms. But none of them have been able to achieve the objective of reforming the Indian police. So many. You would know about Malimat committee. Julio Ribeiro Committee, National Police Commission 1, National Police Commission 2, Soli Sorabji Committee, right? You can also talk about the judgment of the Supreme Court of India in Prakash Singh versus Union of India in the year 2006. All these recommendations that have been made from time to time by these various committees for reforming the Indian police and for reforming the state police forces in India has proven to be a failure to a large extent. The reason for that is, one, primarily because of the lack of political will on part of the political parties and the politicians to reform the police. The reason for that is because if they do so, then they will lose their powers over the control of these particular state police forces and using them for serving their political purpose. Second, of course, is that there has been resistance within the police as well to various recommendations that have been made by these various committees when it comes to the functioning of state police forces. So let us discuss about the various issues associated with the functioning of state police forces in India. Right? See, first and foremost, again here as well, we will talk about the human resource related aspects of the state police forces in India. What are the things that can be mentioned here? One, you can talk about same shortage of workforce. It has been reported that there are up to 20% vacancies in some of the state police forces. In fact, you can also mention that the UN recommends that there should be 222, not 222, no, there should be one police personnel for, or what is the statistic? I don't remember that. I'll check it and I'll let you know tomorrow. But you can just check the UN recommended statistic for the Google पे search कर लीजिएगा एक बार. What is the UN recommended number for the police personnel per 1 million population, or I think per 10,000 population शायद है उनका. You can just check that once. I'm not very sure. I'm not able to remember the number right now. I'm confusing with a few figures right now in my head. So you just check that there is shortage of workforce in the police forces in India. Up to 20% shortages or vacancies have been highlighted in some of the state police forces. Apart from this, you can also talk about that UN recommended number. We are way behind that UN recommended number for maintaining the requisite police force in India when it comes to the human resource issues. Second thing that you can talk about is the issues associated with recruitment in the police forces in India. The recruitment process for the police forces in India is marred with corruption. And as a result, of course, I'll tell you something, just a few days back, I came to know that the position of a constable in Delhi police costs 40 lakh rupees for getting through the interview. Now you can imagine, if you need 40 lakh rupees to become a constable in Delhi police, how much money you would be earning through bribery and corruption once you become a constable, because you would have to recover that amount of money also that you have invested in getting into the Delhi police. So covered, it is marred with corruption, recruitment process. You can also talk about that the recruitment process is unscientific and outdated. The recruitment techniques themselves are unscientific and outdated, right? Yes, 222 police officers for 1 lakh citizens. Yes, exactly. That was the number that I was looking for, and I think in India the number is around 100, right? So unscientific and outdated recruitment methods. If you look at the recruitment of the police at the lower levels, it is done purely at lower levels. The recruitment to the police in India is done purely on the basis of physical criteria. You do not judge a person on his mental aptitude. You do not judge a person on his attitude. You do not judge a person on his dispositions, etc. But you are purely recruiting a person on the basis of physical criteria. Even at the higher levels, अगर आप हायर लेवल्स के ऊपर भी देखोगे तो जो हम इंडियन पुलिस सर्विस के थ्रू रिक्रूटमेंट कर रहे हैं वो कौन सा साइंटिफिक है? You are having one examination for recruitment to the Indian police service, to the Indian administrative service, to the Indian foreign service, to the Indian revenue service. मतलब आपका ये कहना है कि एक आदमी को अगर टैक्स कलेक्शन करना हो और अकाउंटिंग करना हो, इंडियन ऑडिट अकाउंट सर्विस में हो, तो उसके लिए उसको सेम सेट ऑफ स्किल्स, सेम एप्टीट्यूड, सेम रिक्वायरमेंट्स हैं एज इज रिक्वायर्ड फॉर रनिंग आफ्टर क्रिमिनल्स. It makes no sense absolutely at all. So again, we need to mention that unscientific methods, outdated, same examination, single examination for recruitment to the IPS as for the other services. Then the recruitment at the lower levels is done purely on the basis of physical criteria. That is something that can be mentioned by you when we talk about the recruitment issues that are there in the Indian police and how the recruitment is done. What you can also talk about is that Indian police is perhaps the only police in the world where you will see multiple entry points. Now see, this creates a problem because आप अगर कुछ developed countries of the world में देखोगे, the recruitment to the police happens on a single point. Every person has to be recruited as a constable, and then you eventually grow up the ladder. You move up the ladder and you can move up till to the position of the commissioner as well. In India, there are multiple entry points. You can be recruited as a constable. You can be recruited as an assistant commissioner of police through IPS. You can be recruited at the level of the SI. You can be recruited at the level of the inspector also. So the problem is that there are multiple entry points. What that does is that it reduces exposure of senior leadership to the ground realities of police, to the ground realities. When you people will go to National Police Academy in Hyderabad, for a few days when you will be undergoing probation, you will be given some training, कम exposure मिलेगा आपको. एक दिन के लिए SHO बना देंगे, एक दिन के लिए, एक हफ्ते के लिए कांस्टेबल बना देंगे. But that is not enough exposure. You need to understand the system from within and from top to bottom and from bottom to top to be able to lead the organization. That is something that is not seen in case of the Indian police, right? So multiple entry points in recruitment, unscientific methods of recruitment marred with corruption. That is one aspect that can be talked about when we talk about the human resource aspect. Then of course, you can talk about the poor self-image and societal perception of police. See, society perceives police as very corrupt in India, and the same is not just for the society, but even the self-image of the policemen is very poor. As a result of that, they do not really have inhibition in being involved in the atrocities committed on individuals or violation of citizen rights, or even involved themselves in bribery, because they know that they are already having a very poor societal perception as well as a poor self-image, right? So that is also something that can be highlighted by you when we talk about issues related to the recruitment and issues related to the shortage of the workforce when it comes to the Indian policing, right? Now, other than the HR issues, we should also talk about what are the various operational issues in the functioning of police in India. Various operational issues associated with the functioning of police in India. Operational issues में हम क्या बोल सकते हैं? See, first and foremost, you should talk about that how the police in India, the law and order and investigation are not separate. Are not separate departments. Now this creates problems. Why does it create problems? Let's try to understand why having law and order and investigation within the same police department creates problem. Let's say you are SHO of Rajendra Nagar, right? You are supposed to take care of the law and order in Rajendra Nagar. That means that there should be no robberies, there should be no dacoity, there should be no murders, there should be no crime. So when a case will come up in front of you, you will try to blame everyone in the world for that particular criminal activity, but not your police force. तो इन्वेस्टिगेशन आप इस तरीके से करेंगे कि आप, बिकॉज लॉ एंड ऑर्डर आपकी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी, तो आप इन्वेस्टिगेशन ऐसे करेंगे कि कहीं से भी आपकी गलती ना दिखे. पहली बात तो ये कॉन्फ्लिक्ट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट. Second thing is that, see, all across the world you will see that law and order and investigation are specialized branches. Investigation is a specialized branch, law and order is a specialized branch, enforcement is a specialized branch, investigation is a specialized branch. इंडिया में आपको दोनों चीजें एक के अंदर दिखती हैं, और ये एक बहुत बड़ा मेजर प्रॉब्लम है विद रिस्पेक्ट टू द फंक्शनिंग ऑफ द पुलिस फोर्सेज इन इंडिया, राइट? द सेकंड थिंग, ऑपरेशनली अगर हम बात करें तो यू कैन ऑल्सो टॉक अबाउट द फैक्ट दैट इन इंडिया द लॉ एंड ऑर्डर इज अ स्टेट सब्जेक्ट, एंड एज अ रिजल्ट you will find a lot of variation in the functioning of the police in India. There is significant variation in the functioning of police in India. Significant variation दिखेगा आपको, right? आप देखिए तमिलनाडु के अंदर पुलिस is one of the most professional police, and when you compare it with the police, let's say for example in Uttar Pradesh, when you compare the police in Uttar Pradesh, say for example with police in Kerala or with police in Karnataka, it is a much more advanced state, much more developed state. So the police is also much more organized, advanced, and is also much more independent in its functioning. So the significant variation can be seen in the functioning of the police in India, also because of the reason that law and order is a state subject. So reforming the police in India is not a very easy task, because ultimately it would have to be introduced at the state level, right? So that is also something that can be highlighted by you when we talk about operational issues functioning with the association with the functioning of the police in India. इसके अंदर आप एक चीज और मेंशन कर सकते हो, there are lack of grievance redressal mechanisms for the citizens in case there is a violation of the human rights that takes place by the police department. So that is also something that can be highlighted by you. साथ ही साथ आप ये बोल सकते हो excessive interference of politicians in appointments, transfers, postings, etc. also does not allow the police to function in a proper manner. आप in fact ये भी बोल सकते हो that there is excessive day-to-day interference in the functioning of the police in India that does not allow them to function in an independent manner. So excessive day-to-day interference is also something that can be highlighted by you. So operational issues you can highlight. You can highlight the issues associated with the human resources, and then lastly you can also talk about various infrastructural issues. See, you have to also understand the lack of avenues of promotion as well can be mentioned in the HR issues, right? A person who is recruited as a constable at the max can become, in the best possible scenario, can become an ASI. And in most cases that person will retire either as a constable or as a senior constable only. 20-30 years of service, you retire as a head constable at the max. So what is the motivation for that person to be working 24/7 for the society, to put his life at risk, to be running after the criminals, to try and make the society ridden from crimes and criminals? Because they do not have any motivation. The salaries are very less, the emoluments provided are very less, the allowances provided are very less. You have to also understand that there is shortage of the infrastructure also in the police in India. So infrastructural issues, you can talk about shortage of weaponry in the functioning of police in India. And shortage of weaponry में आप BPRD की एक रिपोर्ट के बारे में बोल सकते हो. Bureau for Police Research and Development had given a report where the BPRD had mentioned that there is shortage of up to 75% weaponry in some of the states. In Rajasthan, they highlighted that 75% shortage of weaponry is there, right? So what else do you expect? They will only do time, right? So shortage of weaponry, infrastructural issues. You can also talk about shortage on the latest technology equipment, right? Such as night vision cameras, etc. and all of those things. फिर उसके अलावा आप ना इसमें एक structural issues की भी बात कर सकते हो with respect to the functioning of police in India. Now, in India, the police, it is said, is top and bottom heavy. There are too many people at the top and there are too many people at the bottom, but in between, at the level of the inspector and the sub-inspector, where the real investigation and the law and order enforcement happen, we have shortage of the workforce there. So it is in India, the police pyramid is supposed to be like this, but in India, the police is something like this, where it is very top heavy and where it is bottom heavy. Most of the police recruitment happens at the level of constables, and that is where the most of the police machinery is, and rest of the major recruitment happens at the top level. In between there is a void which is there. So top and bottom heavy structural issue है with the functioning of the police in India. पुलिस में एक और जो structural major issue है functioning when we talk about the police in India and the various structural issues that are there with their functioning, you can also very clearly, जब हम structure के respect में बात करते हैं, आप ये भी बोल सकते हो that the police forces in India are governed by, the Indian police is governed by a colonial act of 1861 Police Act. How can you expect the police forces to function in a democratic country if they have a colonial origin. The objective with which the colonial police or the police had been created in India by the British was to control the Indians. Today, police should not be looking at itself as a force. Rather, police should be a service. I'll give you one example. In New Zealand, when the Christchurch attacks happened, now let me tell you something interesting. In Scandinavian countries, in New Zealand, etc., you will find that the policemen are not supposed to bear arms, because policemen are supposed to be friends of the citizens. Policemen are supposed to be friends of the population. They are not supposed to be harassing the people. In India, it is the opposite. So they are not supposed to bear arms so that people do not get intimidated from the police in India, from the police in these countries. Now, when the Christchurch attacks happened, national emergency was declared in New Zealand, and all the police personnel were supposed to bear arms for a few days, and they were supposed to be on the streets. But an innovative step that was taken by the police in New Zealand at that point of time was all the police officers also started wearing a rose or some kind of a flower on their uniform, a real flower. They put it on their uniform so that they could distract the citizens from the gun or the arm that they were bearing, so that the citizens do not get intimidated, do not fear approaching the police. इंडिया में लोग पुलिस के पास जाने से घबराते हैं, बिकॉज उनको यही नहीं पता कि पुलिस ही कहीं हमें लूट ना ले, पुलिस ही हमें कहीं परेशान ना कर दे. In New Zealand, they put this flower so that they could distract the people from this arm that they were bearing on themselves. So imagine, this is the difference which is there in the attitude of the police towards the society. Police should not be seen as a force to intimidate the people or to coerce the people, but rather seen as a way to help them conduct their act. It should be seen as a way which will come out as the friends of the people, right? So these are some of the problems and issues that are associated with the functioning of the police forces in India, on the HR front, on the operational front, on the infrastructural front, and on the structural front. Now, various committees, I have already told you, have provided various recommendations on the reforming of the police in India. What I will suggest to you is that you please read the 7 directives that were provided by the Supreme Court of India in Prakash Singh versus Union of India. That should help you in understanding what are the various reforms that are required in the functioning of the police in India, right? So that you can refer this. Other than that, you can also refer the summary of any of these reports. Second ARC के अंदर भी कुछ recommendations provided हैं, बहुत सारी reports में recommendation provided हैं with respect to reforming the police. You can refer that. Okay. So this is all about the topic of various security agencies and their mandate, where we covered issues associated with central armed police forces, issues associated with state police forces, and issues associated with the intelligence agencies in India. Yes. Any questions or any doubts that you have related to whatever we have discussed till now? Yes. Any questions? Any questions or any doubts? Okay, so now let me do one thing. I'll just introduce you to the topic of border management and the topic of border security. When we meet tomorrow at 5 o'clock, we will first finish the topic of border management, border security. I will also deal with the topic of role of external state actors in creating challenges to India's internal security simultaneously, and I will also deal with the topic of global terrorism, international terrorism, etc. So those are the topics that are left to be covered as a part of our internal security classes. So let me tell you, now the topic that has been provided by UPSC is called as border management and the challenges, security challenges in the border areas. Now, before we venture into the topic of border management, let us try to understand what is the difference between the term border management and border security. My also one small request to you would be that when you turn up for tomorrow's class at 5 o'clock, before that, please make sure that you have read the handout that have been shared with you with respect to border management and border security. तो आप एक बार उसको पढ़ लोगे, it will become easy for us to understand. Now, border management versus border security. Now, see, what you need to understand is border security is a narrower term of the two. It is a narrower term of the two of border security and border management. Border security is a narrower term. So what do we mean by border security? Border security essentially refers to protection of countries' territory from unwanted and hostile elements. Protection of countries' territory from unwanted and hostile elements so as to secure the borders of a country from external aggression, from acts of narco-terrorism, from acts of trafficking in human beings, from acts of smuggling, etc. That is what is called as border security. So border security refers to securing your borders from hostile and unwanted elements so that they do not enter. So in border security, you are concerned about infiltration. In border security, you are concerned about trafficking of human beings. You are concerned about narco trafficking, etc. and so on and so forth. Now, border management on the other hand is much more than just securing your borders. Border management is effective management. It refers to effective management of border areas so that emphasis is given to both border security as well as economic development of border areas. So in border management, we are not just emphasizing on securing the borders, but overall development of the border areas in the country as well. So border security may be the responsibility of the security forces alone. But border management is supposed to be performed by security forces plus by the administrative agencies that are involved in those areas. So border management is a much broader term where you are not just securing the borders, but you are making them areas of sustainable development, you are also trying to encourage trade between India and the neighboring countries through border management. You're trying to develop the border areas, infrastructure development, so that people in border areas have economic opportunities, so that people in border areas have opportunities to go to different parts of the world, so that they have access to various employment opportunities, etc., and so on and so forth. So that is the difference between the term border management and border security, right? Now, when we will meet tomorrow, the first thing that I will discuss with you will be what are the various issues or what are the various challenges of border management in India. Various challenges associated with border management in India. This is the topic that I will begin with, and simultaneously we will also cover role of external state actors in creating challenges to India's internal security. Yes. Please tell me if you have any questions or any doubts related to whatever we have discussed today. This is all that I had from my end for today's class. Yes, please tell me. Any questions associated with whatever we have discussed in today's class? Okay, no major doubts. Thank you so much. I'll see you for the last class tomorrow at 5 o'clock. Please do ensure that you go through the handout that has been provided to you related to border management. There will be a couple of other handouts also that will be coming your way tomorrow before the class, and we will be discussing remaining topics as well. A handout related to global terrorism as well as militancy in Kashmir. Those are the other two topics that we will be covering simultaneously. Then we will be discussing the other topics, the role of external state actors and the challenges of border management in India. Okay, so I'll see you tomorrow at 5 o'clock and we'll continue from there. Thank you so much for attending the class and wish you a very good day going ahead. Thank you.